I worked as a junior operations analyst at a mid-sized courier company tucked between a car wash and a dental clinic that shared a parking lot. The building was beige in a way that made you forgive beige. Mornings smelled like burnt coffee and printer toner. If I got in early enough, I could beat the hum of conversation and listen to the HVAC clicking through its cycles like a metronome. My desk faced the window, which was generous if you like staring at a view of dumpsters and the back of a bakery. I liked it more than I should have because the bakery's exhaust fans carried a tiny ribbon of cinnamon into the alley, and every half hour the air outside pretended to be kind. My job was pattern spotting with a side of internal politics. Shipments, delays, error codes, driver notes. Someone once joked that operations people are like plumbers for time, unclogging bottlenecks, spackling schedules, making sure nothing overflows into the customer's lap. Not glamorous, but there's a specific pleasure in knowing the exact valve to twist so a whole afternoon stops groaning. I spent a lot of time in spreadsheets and the company's tracking portal, which was sturdy the way an old dog is sturdy, loyal, predictable, a little slow to get off the couch. On Mondays, we ran a stand-up in the break room. The whiteboard wore a permanent shadow of numbers no amount of Windex could erase. Drivers in navy polos leaned against the counter, talking weather and traffic, and the operations team balanced mugs that all said some variation of world's best as if we could manifest quality control with ceramic enthusiasm. I liked the routine. I liked the quiet rituals that made the day hold still. The woman with the bags showed up on a Thursday at 6:45 p.m., after overtime approvals and before the stale cookies went hard in the open box by the fax machine. I was walking home because the bus ran on a schedule that believed in character development. My route took me past a brick apartment building whose intercoms looked like they hadn't worked since dial-up. She was standing at the base of the stairs with two canvas bags that had lost their will to be canvas. "Let me," I said, without thinking, because her right hand was shaking in a way that suggested more stubbornness than strength. She hesitated, eyes narrowing, then nodded like she had performed a background check in a glance. Up close, she smelled faintly of mothballs and lemons. "Third floor," she said. "No elevator. Whoever designed this hated knees." "I'm neutral on knees," I said, and she snorted, approving the existence of humor. The stairwell was narrow and smelled like cumin and dust and the lingering ghost of a cigarette habit. On the second landing she stopped, breath hitching, and waved me on. "You go. My apartment door is the one with the sticker that says, 'No soliciting OR newspapers.'" I meant it about the newspapers, but nobody listens. The door had 3 locks. The sticker had lost a corner and rattled when I knocked with my elbow. Inside, the apartment looked like a thrift store and a library had made a polite treaty. Books in stacks, frames with photos that had outlived their color, a plant that had either been dying for months or thriving on the edge of it. The kitchen counters were clean in a way that suggested either discipline or company. I set the bags down and started unloading. She watched, arms crossed, as if measuring my performance. "Do you always help strangers?" she asked. "Only the ones who look like they can snipe me with sarcasm if I drop the bread." "You have a good read on people." She took off her coat, draping it with precision on the back of a chair. "I'm Lena." "Evan," I said. "Would you like water?" she asked, already pouring. I would offer tea, but it tastes like regret. We sat at her tiny table with the water between us. She told me she had lived there 27 years in a tone that dared time to contradict her. Former school secretary, retired. Widow, long ago. No children. A few nephews who called on holidays. She kept the blinds half closed because the building across the alley was close enough for neighbors to borrow sugar through the air. She liked lemon-hard candies and classical music played at a volume that respected other people's thoughts. "Thank you," she said finally, standing like a court adjourned. "I can't pay you back with cash. But I have something better than money." "Please don't say knowledge," I said. "I work in logistics." "Information," she amended, smiling. "Which is just knowledge cash can't buy." Then, before I could make a joke about exchange rates, she waved me out. "Go home." It's getting dark. I passed her building on my walk home most nights after that. If the light by the mailboxes was on, I would wave. And sometimes she would wave back. Twice I carried her bags. Once I changed a light bulb that required a ladder with questionable integrity. After the third time, she began leaving her door on the latch when she knew I'd be passing and would shout "Don't track" in the outside while already pointing at the mat. I didn't mind. We established a polite routine built on the twin pillars of boundaries and jokes. Work remained its reliable grid of duties and minor emergencies. A pilot route launched for same-day delivery inside a 6-mile radius. My boss, Margot, used the phrase low-hanging fruit so often I started mentally drawing orchards in our dashboards. We negotiated a seasonal contract with a local bakery chain, which meant a morning shipment of boxes large enough to house a toddler. The drivers called them cake coffins. I told them not to, then immediately started using the phrase in my emails. We had a client no one liked, a boutique home goods store that sold candles that cost more than my monthly bus pass. Their founder, a man who wore linen in winter and smiled with all his teeth, called me kid even after I had corrected him twice. They liked to hint at moving their business to a competitor. This worked on Margot the way static works on cat hair. One afternoon, I spotted a set of shipments in the portal with statuses that made no sense: scanned out, never scanned in, then manually marked delivered after hours. The addresses were a pattern only because I lived in patterns. Same driver ID for all of them. Same neighborhoods, clustered like someone had drawn a circle and worked the perimeter. The names on the orders belonged to the home goods store. I pinged the driver, a man named Carl who had been with us 6 months and looked perpetually halfway to a decision. He didn't respond. I flagged it to Margot. She frowned and said she'd look into it. By the end of the day, the statuses had been corrected with timestamps that claimed to be from that morning, except the shadow logs showed otherwise. Someone had overwritten the truth and forgotten that systems remember. I stared at the screen until the columns wobbled. A familiar feeling rose up, the one that visits when you're about to step into something messy and no one asked you to be brave. I could ignore it. I could shrug and let Margot handle it. I could be the person the job expected and go home to leftovers and an unwatered plant. Instead, I downloaded the data, put it in a sheet, and colored it like a disaster map. I wasn't angry. I was awake. The next evening, Lena asked why I looked like someone had told me the ending to a book I was still reading. I gave her the bare outline. She chewed on the inside of her cheek like it was a number. "There's taking and there's stealing," she said. "Taking is what you do when the world didn't pay you what it owes. Stealing is what you do when you think no one will notice. If you're about to notice, do it properly. How do you notice properly? You don't make it about your emotions. You make it about the facts. Then you ask yourself who you become if you look away. Then you decide if you can live with that person." I went home and wrote a timeline. I emailed IT to ask about off-hour edits and who had access to the override function. I left the office early the next morning and did a drive-by on 2 addresses marked delivered after midnight. One was a laundromat with a closed sign and a gaping mail slot. The other was a mailroom in a townhouse complex that opened at 8. No one had signed for anything. The building manager confirmed with the kind of shrug that says the world is exhausting. At 9 a.m., I knocked on Margot's door with my file like a student giving a teacher a project no one wanted to grade. She scanned the pages, face flat, then sighed. "Why do you always find the things that ruin lunch?" she said, but her voice had a thread of respect. "Because lunch can handle it," I said. We called Hour. Hour called Security. Security sat there looking pleased to be included. Carl was pulled from his route before noon and asked to sit in a room with a table and 2 chairs that made every conversation look like a negotiation. He said he had done nothing wrong, then said maybe he had done one thing wrong, then said the portal had glitched, then asked for a lawyer. Our company wasn't large enough to have good scripts for this part. By 5 o'clock he had been escorted out, jacket over his arm, eyes gone flinty with a fear I knew would become a story he'd tell about villains in offices. I didn't enjoy it. I didn't enjoy any of it. But I also didn't look away. The home goods founder called the next day to rage laugh at Margot for 23 minutes. He used the word unacceptable 17 times and the word trust 9. He demanded refunds and discounts and a personal guarantee that no candle would ever be laid again in the history of commerce. Margot listened, apologizing with her eyes and promising with her jaw. When she hung up, she told me I was getting a spot bonus for catching the pattern. I nodded, then immediately felt guilty. I hadn't done it for money. But also, my rent didn't care. 2 weeks later, life had resumed its usual hum. HR sent a bulleted memo about ethics that had been copy-pasted from somewhere uninspired. Drivers resented the new procedure because it existed. The founder sent a box of candles as if to prove he was magnanimous with his wholesale cost. I took one home and hated it for how good it smelled. Lena sprained her ankle in late November. I found out because she didn't meet me in the hall. And the door stayed closed when I knocked. I was about to leave when I heard a muffled come in that suggested she had thought the words as loud as she could. She was on the couch with her leg elevated on 2 pillows that had never met a washer. I stood on a chair, she said, grimacing. The chair held a grudge. I can pick up groceries, I said. And trash. And your prescription. And anything else. She pressed her lips together like refusing would hurt more. Fine. But write everything down so you don't come back with parties instead of pears. The list she dictated had the precision of a recipe for honesty: milk, eggs, rye bread, cheap butter not the good kind because I can't taste the difference, lemon candies if they're on sale, the small bag of oranges because the big net is a scam, a magazine with crosswords but not the kind written by sadists. I brought back the world in my arms, and she nodded as if I had passed an exam. You must have a mother, she said, after I tucked the last item into its exact shelf place. I have 2 parents who taught me to return people's things the way I found them, I said. So you have a mother, she repeated, satisfied. Sit. Tell me something boring about your day. I told her about route optimization and a driver who refused to use the app because he trusted his nose, and the bake sale in HR that sold brownies wrapped like bank accounts. She listened with the openness people reserve for either children or strangers who don't demand narrative. When I left, she said, "You'll do fine," as if I had asked a question. Winter leaned in and held, as if hugging too long. I visited Lena twice a week, sometimes 3. We had an unspoken rule about staying under an hour unless she looked especially small in the chair. I fixed a scraping cabinet door. I rethreaded a blind. She let me throw away a jar of something that had achieved historical status in the back of the fridge, though it took a parliamentary debate. When I scolded her for standing on chairs, she scolded me back for not buying gloves. We maintained our dignity by trading lectures. In January, Margot quit. She gave 2 weeks and a cake I suspect she didn't bake. Her new role was at a tech-adjacent startup that had offices with nap pods and a budget for branded hoodies. I watched her pack the souvenir stress balls into a tote and felt both happy for her and abandoned, a combination that felt childish until I admitted it and felt better. The company posted her job. 3 internal candidates applied. I applied with the kind of cover letter that tries to be both humble and precise. The exec who ran our department, a man named Will with a handshake like a firm winter, called me into a meeting room with a potted plant that had learned resignation. "Listen," he said, dropping into the chair like it had been waiting for him personally. "You're good. Everyone knows you're good. But the client-facing part of this role is a different beast. We might need a little more polish." "Do we want polish?" I asked before I could edit myself, "or do we want fewer late packages?" "Both," he said. "And cheap," he added, almost smiling. He told me they were hiring someone external who had managed a larger book. He told me not to be discouraged. He told me my time would come. The plant in the corner tilted a degree toward the light, as if it disagreed. I swallowed the bruise and thanked him for the feedback. That night, I told Lena. She chewed the edge of a cracker like it was the one thing between us and chaos. Polish is a good excuse if you don't want to say something real, she said. What he meant is he doesn't know if his friends will like you. You're not a latte. I could learn to be a latte, I said. You're a cup of plain coffee that has a point, she said. Be that. It keeps people awake. The external hire arrived with a grin and a watch that looked leased. His name was Tristan, which fit him like a branded hat. He shook everyone's hand like he was gathering data. In his first all hands, he used the phrase "disrupt the last mile" without irony. I tried not to hold it against him. I failed a little. He liked to put his hand on a person's shoulder when he wanted them to move faster. He liked to say "circle back" and then not. He liked to copy me on emails with my ideas restated in a friendlier font. I watched my own work return to me in different clothes, and I felt the specific anger that hadn't learned what to do with itself yet. I did my job, and I did it well, and I kept a record of what I did because I had learned from the portal that memory is an ecosystem. Lena's sprain healed slowly. Her ankle stopped looking like it had hoarded water, but her balance confidence lagged. She held the banister when she didn't need to. She began telling me small things about her life in the way people do when they forget they are telling you anything at all. She had been married to a man named Leo who worked at the post office and carried his kindness like a pocket knife. They had wanted kids, then hadn't, then had wanted again when the wanting was complicated. She had collected teacups, not the dainty kind but the squat ones with ugly handles that stack well. I like anything that admits its purpose, she said. She couldn't bear loud restaurants. She didn't like online banking because she wanted to look money in the eye. In March, a storm took down 3 trees on our street and a sense of proportion with them. Power went out for a day and a half. My apartment retreated to the 19th century except for the way I kept checking my dead phone as if it were a pet that might wake up. I climbed the stairs to check on Lena with 2 flashlights, extra batteries, and a bag of oranges. She answered the door wearing a sweater over a sweater, hair going white in a way that made her look more present, not less. I'm fine, she said. I've been practicing being alone for 50 years. You can borrow my phone charger, I said, then remembered what century we were in. We ate oranges and sat in the dim. She told me stories about the school where she had worked, how she could tell which kids were lying just by how they held their pencil. The ones who stare into your eyes are always lying, she said. Look for the ones who stare slightly to the left, like the truth is sitting in a chair just out of frame. When the power snapped back on at midnight, her living room looked too bright, like a stage after the actors have gone home. I turned the lamps down and locked the windows and left her with 2 flashlights pointed at each other like they were having a conversation. The promotion I didn't get became the praise I did. Tristan thanked me publicly for my attention to detail, which I recognized as the management equivalent of patting a dog that could have built the house. I took my praise and put it on the shelf where I keep things that don't fit. It was almost a year from the stairwell to the day a lawyer called me at work. I answered because the number was local and because I had just finished a file and felt large-hearted. He introduced himself in the careful tone people use when they need to talk about money without making it sound gross. I braced for a debt I had forgotten or a mistake I had made. He asked if I knew a woman named Lena. I do, I said, sitting up, the chair suddenly too honest under me. Is she okay? She passed away last week, he said, with that professional mercy people train into their voices. I'm sorry to bring news like this on the phone. Your number was on a card in her files under people to call. I'm her attorney. The room did the thing where it stretches and shrinks simultaneously. I stared at the spreadsheet, which kept being a spreadsheet. He spoke slowly, giving each phrase room to stand. She left a will. There are a few beneficiaries. You are one of them. What? I said, articulate as a rock. She left you a bequest, he said. I can't go over the details over the phone, but if you can come by my office next week, we can review everything and answer your questions. Is this a joke? I asked, because sometimes children of a certain kind of family ask that when good things surprise them. "It is not," he said, in a way that sounded offended on behalf of paper. He gave me the address, the time, the position of the building relative to a coffee shop I knew. After I hung up, I sat in the chair without moving. Then I stood and walked to the break room. I poured water and didn't drink it. Margot was gone to her startup. Tristan was pacing in the front like opportunity wore cologne. My hands felt like they had been asked to hold something breakable and were refusing the job. I went to Lena's building that evening even though I knew. The super was outside smoking a cigarette that had given up. He recognized me and shook his head once, a period after an impossible sentence. "She went in her sleep," he said, like he was offering a discount. "No mess." I thanked him as if he had cleaned the sky. Her door was already different. The locks had changed hands. I stood on the landing longer than a neighbor would find normal. Then I left, down the stairs she had cursed. Holding onto the banister she never trusted. The lawyer's office was a room with shelves that made the walls look useful. He had a diploma and a photo of a dog who probably didn't know what a diploma was. He explained the will in paragraphs. Lena had left small amounts to 2 nephews. She had left some money to the school where she had worked and to a library that had probably saved her life more than once. She had left the contents of her apartment to be divided at the discretion of the nephews. With a note in her own handwriting, "Make sure the teacups go to someone who will use them." Then he paused, folded his hands, and looked at me with a soft force. "And she left the remainder of her cash assets to you," he said. "After taxes, fees, and the other bequests, the amount is." He slid a paper across. The number was not retire and buy an island. It was not a joke. It was not small. It was a year's salary plus the feeling that the world had winked. I stared at it long enough that he cleared his throat and offered me water like it might translate. "Why?" I asked, knowing this room didn't keep that kind of paper. "She left a letter," he said, and handed me an envelope with my name in the tight, no-nonsense print she used for grocery lists. I didn't open it there. I walked to a park with benches that pretended to be private and sat. The letter was 2 pages, front and back, because she distrusted waste. She wrote about the day on the stairs and about how I had treated her with respect without making a speech about it. She wrote about how the world had gotten louder for her as she aged and how people began talking over her or around her. She wrote about the way I had listened to what she meant instead of what she said. "I had money," she wrote, as if confessing to a minor crime. "Not because I was clever. Because Leo was. He didn't like fancy things and I'm allergic to stupidity. We lived small. The numbers got bigger. I intended to leave it to the school and the library and my nephews. Then I met you, and I remembered what it feels like when someone shows up and doesn't make it a performance. I have already given the school and the library their share. The boys will be fine. This part is for you because you will do something steady and right with it. I can't tell you what to do. I won't try. But if you insist on a suggestion, spend some of it on something that makes you kinder to yourself." I read it twice and cried in a way that made passers-by look away with good manners. Then I put the letter in my bag like it was something that could break. The money changed my spreadsheet but not my job. I still woke up and went to an office where packages were late and people said synergy like it was a verb. But I walked differently. I bought gloves without arguing with myself about the price of fingers. I paid off the last not large debt and felt a quiet click snap into place that I didn't realize had been loose. I called my parents and told them an abbreviated version. My mother cried the way people cry when the world has given their child a pass on something. My father said he had never met anyone named Lena who wasn't reliable. I asked the lawyer about the nephews. I wrote them each a note separate from the legal letters. "I met your aunt by accident," I wrote. "You knew her much longer. I want you to know that she was seen, even by a stranger." One nephew wrote back, a 2-sentence email with a gratitude that sounded like someone who didn't know where to put it. The other sent me a photo of a teacup with the caption, "This one's my favorite," and I loved him for it. Tristan congratulated me when he heard about the money because gossip rides the same routes as mail. He tried to make a joke about me finally being able to afford his watch. I let it slide past. Will took me to lunch and said, in a tone that suggested he was stealing a virtue, that I should consider taking time off. I said no, and meant it, and also later took a day anyway on a random Tuesday when the sky looked like a good argument. What the money really did was settle a decade-long debate I had been having with myself about who I was allowed to be. Without the constant hum of scarcity, I found I could hear other frequencies. I noticed when I was generous because I wanted to be versus when I was generous because I was afraid someone would leave. I noticed that I had been waiting for someone to promote me into permission. I noticed that my job, which I was good at, did not require my sense of meaning to fit inside a delivery window. I started a small fund at the school where Lena had worked. Not a scholarship with a plaque. Something less heroic. I called it the Forgot Your Lunch Fund. The principal, a woman with teeth like resilience, cried and then laughed and said it was the best name she'd heard in years. I paid for a repair on their library door that everyone had learned to jiggle. I bought a class set of cheap, sturdy teacups for the staff room and wrote on the box, "Use them, please." At work, a new pattern emerged in the portal, quieter and less dramatic. A driver shaving miles by making unapproved shortcuts that made deliveries technically on time and practically impossible to find. I escalated it and made a map that looked like a string art project. I presented it in a meeting where Tristan nodded like he had thought of it. Afterwards, he put a hand on my shoulder and said, "Polish, my friend. You're getting there." I waited for my irritation to bloom. It didn't. It had other plans. I asked Will for 30 minutes and brought a list. Not a demand, not a speech. A list of the 5 changes that would make our operation breathe better. Slightly higher base pay for drivers to reduce churn. A cap on client-initiated panic calls that bypassed the portal. A monthly crossover between ops and sales so each had to listen to the other. A quarterly review of the override permissions. A rotation that gave the dispatch desk a second body during the noon crush. He listened, which was new. Maybe he had changed, or maybe I had. "This is good," he said. "We can probably implement 3 this quarter." I had expected 0. I said thank you. I did not try to convert his yes into a bigger yes. I left the office feeling like someone who had not only found a door but also decided to use it. Spring thinned the air until it was transparent. I threw away the candle. I kept Lena's letter in my desk drawer at home. Sometimes I took it out and read the line about making myself kinder. I didn't really know how to do that, not in ways that didn't feel silly. So I tried small experiments. I started leaving my phone on the counter when I ate instead of next to my plate like a guard. I said no to gatherings I knew would steal more than they gave. I took long walks on Sundays to parts of the city that hadn't asked for my opinions. I went to a ceramics class and made a bowl that could politely be described as confident. The instructor, a man who wore aprons like a tux, told me to celebrate the wobbles. I decided to find that sentence at least 60% true. I passed Lena's building whenever I could. The sticker was gone from the door. The mailboxes had new labels in a neat script that didn't know who used to stand there. One afternoon I saw a woman about my age coming out, keys in her mouth, carrying a lamp that had lost its shade. I wanted to ask if the plant had survived the move. I didn't. I'm not entitled to ghosts. I nodded and kept walking. A year after the stairs, I took a week off. Not for a trip. Just to test what my days looked like if I wasn't constantly timing everything. I woke up without an alarm and discovered my body liked 7:12 a.m. I made coffee badly and then slightly better. I sat in a cafe and watched people argue about muffins like they were policy. I wrote down 10 things I liked doing and picked 2 to practice. I made a budget that included a line called generosity, which was really just a line called room. On the last day of my week off, I visited the school. The principal led me through the halls like a tour guide at a museum of noise. The lunch fund had been quietly revolutionary, she said. The library door opened without a performance. One of Lena's former colleagues hugged me like I had done something heroic for solving a hinge. Someone had brought in teacups that didn't match. We made tea that tasted like the past in a way that didn't hurt. I didn't tell them the whole truth of what Lena had left me. It wasn't secrecy. It was respect. The story wasn't the money. The story was the staircase and the way it felt to be useful before anyone asked me to be. The story was how a small gesture had stepped into a larger life and taken off its shoes. On Monday, I returned to work and found that 2 of my 5 changes had already made the day's map less angry. The drivers looked less like they were chewing on electric wire. Tristan asked if I wanted to join a client call with the home goods founder. I said yes and then said about 8 sentences and then stayed quiet. The founder asked for a discount. I said we could offer a 2-week trial on earlier pickups if they committed to more accurate cutoff times. Tristan looked at me like I had spoken fluent Linen. After the call, he didn't put a hand on my shoulder. He handed me a sticky note with one word on it: nice. I kept it not because the praise mattered but because the change did. Every now and then, when the bus was late, I would walk the long way home and pass the alley behind the bakery. The cinnamon line was always there like a rule. I would think about the night on the stairs and the way I had lifted someone else's weight without needing to be seen. I would think about how the money had not made me a different person, it had made me more myself and less afraid of the rent. I would think about Lena's letter and that sentence about kindness that kept rearranging my days. I once imagined that big changes would come with trumpets. Instead, they arrived like a corrected invoice. Quiet adjustments that, when added together, turned a version of my life into a better one. I didn't become a saint. I didn't quit my job to start a foundation named after anyone. I adjusted a schedule, funded a hinge, learned to make decent coffee, and stopped letting other people's titles decide whether I was allowed to be right. If I have a moral now, it's small and stubborn. When you notice something, notice it properly. When you can carry weight, carry it with respect. When a person trusts you with a key, open the door and turn the lights on and make sure the floor is safe. And if luck arrives in an envelope, accept it without turning it into guilt. You don't pay the world back by hoarding your good fortune. You pay it forward by standing where someone else can lean. That's all. I still work in a beige building. I still like the view of dumpsters because the air smells like cinnamon every 20 minutes. Some evenings I stop at the base of a certain stairwell and look up out of habit. I don't expect anyone to open the door. I carry my own groceries, 1 bag in each hand, and walk slowly enough to notice the way the light hits the mailboxes. I do my job, and I do it properly, and I make room for the kind of luck you only earn by acting like you don't deserve it.